Hello, PentaxTips here, and today we have an Asahi Pentax Spotmatic for an overview training video. So this video will not only be applicable for the original Spotmatic, but will also fundamentally be similar to the subsequent handful of Spotmatics, including the Spotmatic 2, Spotmatic 2A, SP500, and SP1000. For reference, any North American Honeywell branded version of these cameras also operate the exact same. The Spotmatic of 1964 was built off of previous Pentax successes by including similar features of the preceding series, such as having an eye-level pentaprism viewfinder with a quick return mirror,
an automatic push-pin aperture operation,
a high max shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second, and incorporating the extremely popular M42 screw mount. However, what sets the Spotmatic apart, and the reason the Spotmatic was such a major hit, is because this was the first major camera on the consumer market that contained a through-the-lens light meter. This camera's prototype even contained the world's first through-the-lens spot meter. However, the model making it to market had the more user-friendly center-weighted meter. This was an entirely new concept on the photography market. That is, the same light that passes through whichever lens you have attached to the camera to frame your scene is the exact same light used for metering. In previous cameras, the light meter was either a separate unit external to the camera entirely, or it was built onto the body of the camera but only metered a predefined area, which may cause problems when using wider angle or telephoto lenses. This new technology, being able to measure the light through the lens, took the market by storm, and the Spotmatic became one of the best-selling film cameras of all time. We'll be covering all aspects of the Spotmatic. Check out the description to jump to specific topics. Looking at the front of the camera, we have the prominent Asahi Pentax branding, in addition to the Asahi Optical Company logo engraved at the front of the pentaprism housing. And just to the side, we see the model name Spotmatic. We have metal strap lugs on each side of the camera, flash sync ports on one side of the camera, and a self-timer mechanism on the other. On the side of the mirror box, we have a switch that when we press upwards, activates the nifty new internal through-the-lens light meter. The manual simply refers to this switch as the meter switch, so I'm guessing, as seen from above, the potentially interpreted SW may actually just be an inverted MS for meter switch.
There's a small window here, and when the switch is pushed up, you'll see a red indicator here to remind you the meter is on.
When the shutter is released, the meter automatically slides off. However, if you're just metering a scene but you don't take the shot, always ensure to turn off that meter when you're not using it, as the batteries will drain fast. And of course, the revered M42 mount. This screw mount became extremely popular, with a design specification being universally accepted across many camera brands. This means there is a massive catalog of compatible lenses, with many different focal lengths and apertures readily available on the secondhand market. Just for reference, here internal to the camera box is a little paddle, which will actuate the automatic push-pin aperture on the rear of your lens. This paddle actuates in coordination with the shutter button, in addition to when the light meter is switched on. Therefore, we know the Spotmatic's light meter is a stop-down type light meter, which also operates as the camera's depth of field preview. The back of the camera contains the eye-level finder, a simple camera film back door, and an Asahi Optical Company Japan engraving. The bottom of the camera contains our regular tripod screw mount, our film rewind release button, and a battery under this screw-on cover.
The camera's native battery required a 1.35 volt mercury battery that is no longer being manufactured.
See a video linked below to learn more about the Spotmatic circuitry and batteries. Short version is, this Spotmatic contains a bridge circuit design that is unaffected by minor voltage changes, so you can use the more common 1.55 volt batteries without any issues. Right on! Top left of the camera has a film type reminder dial, with an associated arrow to indicate if the camera is either empty, loaded with a panchromatic, aka black and white, or color film. Includes icons for both outdoor or indoor color conditions. On top of the film rewind dial, stored away, is the film rewind crank. Next, over here we have the engraved serial number, and the Spotmatic model designation, this one being the original Spotmatic, so just referred to here as SP. On the top right, we have the shutter speed selector dial with 11 stops between a 1 second exposure and a max shutter of 1/1000th of a second, indicated by this small arrow on the left of the dial. Also, for long exposures, a bulb mode is available where the shutter will remain open for however long you have the shutter button pressed down. This X next to the 1/60th of a second marks our flash sync speed. So ensure you have your shutter selected to this speed or slower when utilizing an external flash. Interesting note here, the little arrow next to the dial will turn red when the current settings are beyond the range of measurability for the light meter to work properly. Inlaid into the shutter dial contains our ASA selection. This is an equivalent to our more modern ISO standard of film speed. You can select your ASA by raising up the outer edge of the dial and rotating. Here you can select between an ASA of 20 to 1600. Next up, of course, we have our shutter release button, which is actually also a screw port for a remote shutter release. And last up, we have our very satisfying rapid wind film advance lever, perfectly curved and textured tipped for efficient right-hand thumb operation. On top of the film advance is a windowed display featuring a frame counter that is automatically reset when you open the camera back. Next to the dial contains a wind indicator that is red when the film is already advanced and wound, or black when the trigger is tripped. To load film into your camera, first, don't forget, set the ASA dial on your camera to that of the film speed you're loading into the camera. Also, set that film reminder dial up top accordingly. Next, pull the film rewind crank up to a position where it sits comfortably, then pull up once again to release the spring-loaded back door. Place your film canister into the left side of the camera, and push the film rewind crank back down and into the canister. Pull the leader across the film runner guide rails, and insert the leader firmly into the film take-up spool. Now you can advance your film and release the shutter until the take-up sprockets engage with the film perforations. You can now close the door, and the camera back's pressure plate will hold the film flat to the image plane. You can now advance the film and release the shutter, repeating until the frame indicator is set to 0. You can also tell that your film is loaded correctly by the rewind crank rotating counterclockwise while you advance to the next frame. The Spotmatic was released with a new series of lenses called the Super-Takumars. These lenses came equipped with a push-pin aperture that automatically reopens when depressed. This is opposed to the prior series ironically called the Auto-Takumars, which, granted, would automatically stop down with the shutter. It still had to be manually reopened with a lever after every shot. Super-Takumars, now fully automatic, allowed for only the briefest moment of mirror blackout, allowing for a continuously nice and bright viewfinder during image acquisition. Should be noted to keep your light meter turned off when mounting a Super-Takumar, or you'll bend that back pin. Also, there is a switch on Super-Takumars to swap between the fully automatic aperture and a manual aperture selection. This allows these lenses to be used on the older camera models, even ones without an aperture paddle. However, should also be noted that the company's first 50mm f1.4 lens became available. This exceptional lens is rumored to have been designed as a Zeiss planar killer and contained an 8-element formula with a protruding rear element. This element can be an issue on older cameras with the larger aperture paddles, because the actuating paddle would strike the element. Generally, it's recommended to only use that lens on Spotmatics and newer cameras, or at least with cameras that contained an orange R marking on the film rewind knob. The Spotmatic is a manual exposure camera. However, there are niceties to help you along the way. If you're new to photography, linked below is a video with an overview of the exposure triangle, the basics on how to achieve the proper brightness and characteristics of your desired image. For the era, one of the coolest new cutting-edge features was that internal through-the-lens light meter. However, we are still going to have to use what's known as stop-down metering. This is opposed to an open aperture metering such as on the later ES2 and Spotmatic F cameras. Link here for interest. Here's how I recommend you take an exposure with the Spotmatic. First, ensure your ASA is set to that of the film speed loaded into your camera. Adjust your shutter speed accordingly to your ambient conditions. A longer speed for darker conditions and a faster speed for brighter conditions. You'll come back to this step later if you need more or less light for your exposure. Now, viewfinder to your eye, you'll frame your scene and manually focus. Still looking through the viewfinder, you'll slide the light meter switch on the camera box upward, which will activate the light meter and stop down your lens. On the right side of the frame in the viewfinder is located a matchstick light meter needle. The game will be to balance that needle in the middle. When the needle points up, we are overexposed, and when the needle points down, we are underexposed. Now we're going to rotate our aperture ring on the lens while viewing the light meter needle through the viewfinder, stopping when we have successfully balanced the needle. You'll notice that the viewfinder will become increasingly dark as you stop down the lens. And this is why you should choose to focus your image sufficiently before activating the light meter and stopping down your lens. Also, as you stop down the lens, you'll be previewing your depth of field. If we cannot balance the needle no matter what aperture we've selected, this is when you need to adjust your shutter speed to acquire the necessary light. Once we are happy of our exposure settings, you may now release the shutter. You'll notice that immediately after your exposure, the light meter will deactivate and your aperture will automatically open back up, nice and bright. Thanks, Super-Takumars. To operate the self-timer, first ensure your exposure is set correctly and your film is advanced. Now you can rotate the self-timer lever down. The amount that you rotate the lever will dictate the length of time. You have to rotate at least to a 90 degree, which will provide for about 5 seconds, while a full 180 degree rotation will provide for about 13 seconds. To activate the self-timer, hit that little button that was uncovered when you rotated the lever. The gearbox will begin slowly rotating back to its starting position. When it gets close to the top, the mirror flips up, the aperture trips, stopping down the lens, and when the lever reaches the button at the very top, your shutter is released. To check the battery, first off, ensure you're using fresh batteries, with the plus sign facing towards the top of the camera. Set the shutter speed dial to the bulb position, and set the ASA dial to 100. Now while looking through the viewfinder, look at the light meter needle while you activate the switch. If the needle drops rapidly down, that indicates that you have a good battery. If the needle stays in the up position, you need new batteries, or it may indicate that you have a broken meter. When you get to the end of your film roll, and the indicator shows the correct frame, you'll feel the film advance lever pulled taut, and you won't be able to complete a full ratchet cycle. Press the film rewind release button on the bottom of the camera, flip open the film rewind crank on the top of the camera, and start rotating the crank clockwise. You can feel the tension and hear the film being loaded into the canister, and that tension will release when you have completed rewinding all the film. Now you can pull the film rewind crank up to its first position and pull up once again to release the spring-loaded back door and extract your rewound film canister. You'll notice that the frame counter has automatically been reset, ready for that next roll.
Thanks for viewing this Spotmatic overview training, and remember, if you like this content and want to see more like it, please like and subscribe. Thanks.